Cassandra Hayes's hand trembled as the champagne spilled over the glass, staining the white tablecloth of the buffet. It wasn't the sparkling liquid that made her shudder, but rather the man who had just entered the main hall of Stone Enterprises. Christian Wolff, the CEO who had transformed the company into a billion-dollar empire and who, according to office rumors, hadn't smiled since taking over 3 years ago. Cassandra quickly worked to clean up the mess, her cheeks burning. It was her first Christmas party at the company, and she was already causing small disasters. As a junior assistant in the marketing department, she was supposed to be invisible, especially to someone like Christian Wolff. The man was a legend in Seattle. He closed deals that others deemed impossible, fired executives before breakfast, and never, absolutely never, attended corporate parties. Until today. "I need to get out of here," Cassandra murmured to herself, abandoning the buffet and quickly walking toward the less crowded hallway on the 32nd floor. Her new heels, bought specifically for the occasion, made her feet scream in pain. The party was far from over, but staying meant risking another awkward encounter, or worse, running into Victoria Chen. Victoria's name still left a bitter taste in her mouth. 3 months since the breakup, and the pain still throbbed like a fresh wound. Seeing her ex-girlfriend at the party, laughing too loudly, touching the arm of that handsome lawyer from the legal department, had felt like getting punched in the stomach. Victoria had left her for someone more ambitious, someone who really had a future in the company. The words still echoed in Cassandra's ears. She turned a corner and collided with something, or rather someone, solid as a wall. Firm hands held her by the shoulders, preventing her from falling backward. "I'm sorry. I wasn't looking." The words died in her throat. Christian Wolff stood before her, his hands still on her shoulders. Up close, he was even more intimidating than he appeared during the few times Cassandra had seen him crossing the office. Dark gray eyes, a strong jaw, perfectly styled black hair. He wore a suit that probably cost more than her annual salary. "It's okay," he said, his voice deep and controlled. Then his eyes narrowed slightly, as if something had caught his attention behind her. Cassandra followed his gaze and saw Victoria, standing at the end of the hallway, watching them with an expression she knew well, that mix of possessiveness and jealousy that Victoria always tried to disguise as concern. "Act like you're going to kiss me." Christian Wolff's voice dropped to a husky whisper, so low that only she could hear. His fingers tightened slightly on her shoulders, and Cassandra felt her heart race. "What?" she managed to say, her mind trying to process the impossible request. "Now, please." There was something in his eyes, something that didn't match the reputation for coldness that preceded him. Urgency, perhaps, or desperation. Cassandra didn't have time to question or analyze. Instinctively, she rose onto her toes, her hands finding his chest, solid and warm beneath the expensive fabric of his suit. She could feel Christian's heart beating against her palms, too fast for someone so composed. Their breaths mingled as she brought her face closer to his, stopping mere inches apart. It was then that Cassandra realized where they were. Right above them, suspended from the ceiling with a festive red ribbon, hung a sprig of mistletoe. Christian didn't move to close the distance between them, but he also didn't pull away. His eyes roamed over Cassandra's face with an intensity that made her feel as if she were under a microscope. She could see every detail of him, the tiny lines around his eyes, the nearly imperceptible scar at the corner of his left eyebrow, the lips that never curved into genuine smiles. "Perfect timing," he murmured, and Cassandra didn't know if he was referring to the mistletoe or the whole situation. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Victoria turn and disappear back into the main hall. Mission accomplished, apparently. But Christian still hadn't let her go. "She's gone," Cassandra whispered, surprised at how difficult it was to form words when she was so close to him. "I know." Christian swallowed hard, and Cassandra watched the movement of his throat, fascinated. "Thank you. I needed that." "Do you have a stalker ex-girlfriend too?" The words slipped out before she could filter them, and Cassandra immediately regretted it. To her surprise, something that could be considered a smile touched Christian's lips. Something like that. He finally released her, but not before his fingers slid down her arms, leaving a trail of warmth on Cassandra's skin. She took a step back, suddenly aware of how inappropriate the whole situation was. Cassandra Hayes, Marketing Department. She introduced herself automatically, extending her hand in a professional manner, as if they hadn't just shared a moment that defied any corporate protocol. Christian took her hand, and Cassandra noticed how small it looked, enveloped by his. Christian Wolf. But you already knew that. Everyone knows who you are, Mr. Wolf. Christian, he corrected, still holding her hand. After what you just did for me, I think we can dispense with the formalities. Cassandra felt her face heat up. It was just a favor between colleagues. It was more than that. Christian finally let go of her hand, but his eyes remained fixed on her. You saved me from an extremely uncomfortable situation. Before Cassandra could ask what exactly he was escaping from, voices approached down the hallway. Christian immediately stepped away from her, his expression returning to that mask of professional control he wore as armor. Two executives that Cassandra vaguely recognized from the 10th floor appeared, stopping abruptly upon seeing the CEO. Mr. Wolf, we didn't expect to see you here tonight, one of them said, clearly nervous. Change of plans, Christian replied curtly. Then, without looking at Cassandra, he added, Ms. Hayes, thank you for the update on the project. We'll continue this conversation on Monday. Cassandra blinked, confused for a moment, before understanding. He was giving her an out, an explanation for what would seem like a strange interaction if anyone asked. Sure, Mr. Wolf. Monday. She passed by the executives, returning to the main hall with her legs still trembling. When she dared to look back, Christian was watching her, those dark gray eyes following her every move before he turned to speak with the men. Back at the party, Cassandra looked for Victoria but couldn't find her. She had probably left early, as she always did when things didn't go as planned. Cassandra grabbed another glass of champagne, this time without spilling anything, and allowed herself a small smile. She had no idea what exactly had happened in that hallway, but something had changed. She could feel it in her fingertips that still tingled where they had touched Christian's chest, in the warmth that still lingered where his hands had held her shoulders. What had started as a night she wanted to forget had turned into something completely different. And as Cassandra watched the snowflakes begin to fall beyond the skyscraper windows, covering Seattle with a white blanket, she wondered if Monday would really bring a conversation about non-existent projects, or if Christian Wolf was as good at pretending as she was. The weekend seemed to drag on forever for Cassandra. Saturday and Sunday merged into a fog of circular thoughts, all returning to that moment under the mistletoe. Christian's firm hands on her shoulders, the warmth of his body so close, the husky whisper still echoing in her ears. She tried to distract herself with household chores, a marathon of shows, and even a long run around Green Lake Park, but nothing could erase the feeling that something fundamental had changed on Friday night. Monday arrived with a typical Seattle drizzle, turning the city into a gray watercolor. Cassandra chose her outfit with a care she hadn't shown in months. A navy blue blouse that Victoria always said brought out her eyes, paired with tailored pants that made her feel professional and confident. As she looked at herself in the mirror of her small apartment in Capitol Hill, she questioned her own motivations. Was she getting ready to impress Christian Wolf? The idea was absurd. He was the CEO. She was a junior assistant. Worlds not just different, but completely separated by corporate hierarchies and social realities. The Stone Enterprises office buzzed with post-holiday energy when Cassandra arrived at 8 in the morning. Colleagues exchanged stories about the party, some with conspiratorial smiles, others with expressions of regret, suggesting questionable choices involving too much champagne and too little judgment. Cassandra kept her head down as she made her way to her desk in the marketing department, hoping no one would interrogate her about her early exit. "You missed the best part," said Marcus, her cubicle mate, appearing with 2 coffees. He handed one to her with a smile. James from finance made an emotional speech about valuing employees, then vomited in the ornamental plant pot. Cassandra accepted the coffee gratefully. Sounds like my exit was strategically brilliant then, or cowardly, depending on the perspective. Marcus leaned in closer, lowering his voice. Although, according to some very interesting rumors, you had a private encounter with a certain mysterious CEO who never shows up at corporate parties until he decides to show up on Friday. Cassandra's heart skipped a beat. Rumors are just rumors, Marcus. So you don't deny it? I have nothing to deny or confirm. She turned on her computer, determined to end that line of conversation. We bumped into each other in the hallway. End of story. Marcus watched her with that analytical expression that made him an excellent marketing professional. He could read between the lines better than anyone Cassandra knew. If you say so, but know that Victoria spent the rest of the night trying to figure out what happened. She was, let's say, bothered. The mention of her ex-girlfriend brought a mix of satisfaction and discomfort. Cassandra wasn't vengeful by nature, but admitting that Victoria had shown jealousy provided a petty pleasure she preferred not to analyze too deeply. The first hours of the morning passed in a normal sequence of emails, team meetings, and reports. Cassandra dove into work, allowing the familiar routine to calm her nerves. Perhaps Friday had just been a strange and isolated moment, something they would both forget quickly. Christian probably didn't even remember her. Men like him didn't think twice about junior assistants. It was almost noon when the phone on her desk rang. Not the internal line she used for departmental communications, but the direct line that rarely received calls. Cassandra Hayes, she answered, balancing the phone between her shoulder and ear while continuing to type a report. Ms. Hayes. The deep voice made her fingers freeze over the keyboard. Christian Wolf. I mentioned we would continue our conversation about the project today. Cassandra needed a moment to regain her ability to speak. Mr. Wolf. We don't really have a project. I know that. You know that. There was a hint of humor in his voice, something she hadn't expected. But since I use that excuse in front of witnesses, we need to keep it consistent. Can you come to my office in 15 minutes? It was clearly a disguised order. Sure, where? 40th floor. My assistant Lauren will wait for you at the elevators. The call ended before Cassandra could respond. She stared at the phone for several seconds, trying to process what had just happened. Problem? Marcus appeared in the entrance of the cubicle, always attentive. I need to go to the 40th floor. Marcus's eyes widened. The 40th floor? That's executive territory. No one at our level goes there unless they're being promoted or fired, or summoned by the CEO to discuss a project that doesn't exist, Cassandra murmured, grabbing her tablet and a folder to look professional. Wait, what? But Cassandra was already walking toward the elevators, her heart racing with each step. The journey to the 40th floor felt both too long and too short. When the doors finally opened, she was greeted by an elegant woman in her 50s, with impeccably styled gray hair and sharp eyes that assessed Cassandra in 2 seconds. Ms. Hayes, I'm Lauren Mitchell, executive assistant to Mr. Wolf. Please, follow me. The 40th floor was another world compared to the 20th, where the marketing department was located. Here, everything was luxurious yet understated. Thick carpets that muffled footsteps, modern artwork on the walls, dark wood doors suggesting corporate secrets. Lauren guided her down a quiet hallway to a double door at the end. Mr. Wolf is waiting for you, Lauren said, knocking once before opening the door. Christian Wolf's office was exactly what Cassandra would imagine for a billionaire CEO, spacious with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of Seattle and Puget Sound in the background. But what caught her attention was not the minimalist decor or the imposing desk, but the man standing by the windows, hands in his pockets, looking out over the city below. Christian turned when she entered, and Cassandra was hit again by that intense presence he carried. In the daylight, without the festive atmosphere and champagne, he seemed even more formidable. "Ms. Hayes, thank you for coming." He gestured to the chairs in a sitting area off to the side, away from the formality of the desk. "Please, have a seat." Cassandra chose an armchair, keeping her back straight, the tablet in her lap like a shield. Christian sat across from her, and for a moment simply studied her with those dark gray eyes that seemed to see through all her defenses. "I owe you an apology," he began, surprising her. "On Friday, I put you in an uncomfortable position without proper explanations." "It was unexpected," Cassandra admitted, choosing her words carefully. "But I understand that we all have situations we prefer to escape from." Christian tilted his head slightly. "Insightful. The woman I was avoiding is Veronica Ashford. Do you know her?" Cassandra searched her memory. "The acquisitions director? I've heard of her, but we've never interacted. Veronica and I had a relationship." Christian said the word as if it were painful. "Brief, 2 years ago. She has difficulty accepting that it's over. When she found out I would be at the party, something she's been asking for months, she interpreted it as a sign of reconciliation. And it wasn't," Cassandra completed. "Definitely not." Christian ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that made him unexpectedly human. "When I saw her walking toward me with that determination I recognize well, I panicked. And then you bumped into me under that ridiculous mistletoe, and it seemed like a solution. Using a random employee as a human shield?" For the first time, Cassandra saw something that could be considered embarrassment cross his face. "When you put it that way, it sounds terrible." "Because it was terrible," she said, but without real anger. In fact, there was something comforting in knowing that Christian Wolf, the feared CEO, also made impulsive mistakes. "But it worked, apparently. She didn't bother you for the rest of the night?" "No, she left shortly after." Christian leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Which brings me to the real reason I called you here. Veronica messaged me on Saturday. She saw you and me together. And now she believes I'm in a relationship." Cassandra felt a weight form in her stomach. "That's problematic." "Yes and no." Christian hesitated, and Cassandra realized he was carefully weighing his next words. "Veronica has significant connections on the board of directors. In recent months, she's been using those connections to make my professional life complicated, always with the justification that I should reconsider our compatibility. With her believing I'm involved with someone else, perhaps she'll finally give up." "So you want me to keep up the charade?" Cassandra said slowly, beginning to understand. "For a limited time, just enough for Veronica to accept reality and move on." Christian watched her with intensity. "I know it's a lot to ask, but I'm willing to compensate you adequately and ensure that your career at Stone Enterprises flourishes." Cassandra should have been outraged. She should have immediately refused and left that office with her dignity intact. But as she looked at Christian Wolf, she saw not the feared CEO, but a man genuinely desperate for a solution to a problem that clearly haunted him. And there was another thing, a selfish and vengeful thought she didn't want to admit out loud. Victoria would see. Victoria would know that Cassandra was involved with someone powerful, successful, someone who made that handsome lawyer insignificant by comparison. "How long?" she asked, and saw relief wash over his eyes. "A month. Maybe 2, at most." Cassandra took a deep breath. This was madness. Absolute madness. "Okay," she said, sealing an agreement that would change everything. "I'll pretend to be your girlfriend." The following week transformed Cassandra's life into something unrecognizable. On Tuesday, she found herself being transferred to a private office on the 25th floor, not the 40th. Christian had been careful to maintain some apparent professional distance, but definitely an upgrade that didn't go unnoticed. The space was compact yet elegant, with a window offering a view of Elliott Bay and a door that closed, luxuries that junior assistants rarely experienced. Special Projects Coordinator. Marcus read the new business card that had appeared on Cassandra's desk on Wednesday, his tone oscillating between impressed and suspicious. That wasn't even a position that existed last week. The company is expanding, Cassandra replied, avoiding his eyes as she organized the files she had brought from her old cubicle. The lie had a bitter taste, but it was necessary. Christian had explained that they needed a justification for being seen together regularly. A sudden promotion would raise questions, but less suspicious than inexplicable encounters. What Christian hadn't mentioned was how meticulous he would be in constructing this charade. On Thursday, Cassandra received an email from Lauren Mitchell, the executive assistant, with a detailed agenda. Lunch on Friday at the Metropolitan Grill, a gala event on Saturday night at the Four Seasons, brunch on Sunday at a cafe that, according to Lauren's research, Veronica Ashford frequented. "We need to be seen," Christian explained during a quick meeting in his office on Thursday afternoon. "Veronica has eyes everywhere. If this seems hidden or hesitant, she won't believe it." Cassandra studied the man sitting behind the imposing desk, noting the shadows under his eyes that suggested sleepless nights. "Do you really believe she's that obsessed? You don't know her." Christian opened a drawer, pulling out a thin folder that slid across the table to her. "Emails she sent in the last 6 months. Gifts that appeared at my house. Yes. She still has the key she refused to return. Calls to my mother suggesting that I was confused about my feelings." Cassandra flipped through the folder, her stomach tightening as she read some of the messages. There was a disturbing intensity there, a refusal to accept rejection that bordered on harassment. "Why didn't you involve HR or lawyers?" "Because Veronica is smart enough to never cross legal lines, and because her uncle is on the board." Christian rubbed his face with his hands, suddenly looking exhausted. "I could handle professional consequences, but when she started contacting my family, suggesting to investors that I was emotionally unstable after the breakup, I needed another solution." Now, on Friday afternoon, Cassandra looked at herself in the mirror of the women's bathroom on the 25th floor, trying to calm the nerves dancing in her stomach. Lunch would be in 40 minutes. Christian had sent a message earlier. "Lauren reserved a table for 1 p.m. My driver will pick you up at the main entrance at 12:45. Driver. Cassandra almost laughed. A week ago, she was taking the bus to work. "You look different." The voice behind her made Cassandra jump. Victoria was leaning against the bathroom door, arms crossed, an expression Cassandra knew well. That mix of predatory curiosity and residual possessiveness that her ex had never quite managed to hide. "Hi, Victoria." Cassandra forced her voice to remain neutral as she applied another touch of lip gloss, refusing to show how much that presence still affected her. "Own office. Sudden promotion." Victoria stepped closer, studying Cassandra's reflection in the mirror. "Marcus says you have mysterious lunches scheduled. That's very ambitious of you." There was poison in that last word, a thinly veiled accusation. Victoria had always accused Cassandra of lacking ambition, of settling for mediocrity. Now, faced with contrary evidence, she seemed to want to rewrite her as calculating. "Things change," Cassandra said simply, putting the gloss away in her bag and turning to face Victoria directly. In the harsh light of the bathroom, she could see the small lines of tension around her ex's mouth, the way her eyes narrowed with something that could be insecurity. Especially after last Friday. Victoria took a step closer, invading Cassandra's personal space in a way that would have made her heart race before. Now, it only irritated her. "Christian Wolf. Really, Cassandra? You think he's interested in you? Men like him don't get seriously involved with..." "With what?" Cassandra interrupted, her voice low, but filled with a firmness that surprised them both. "Finish that sentence, Victoria." Victoria stepped back slightly, something glimmering in her eyes that could be reluctant respect. "I'm just saying you should be careful. Don't get hurt chasing something impossible." Like you care. Cassandra grabbed her bag, walking toward the door, but she stopped in the doorway, looking back. And Victoria, stop talking about me with Marcus or anyone else. My life is no longer your concern. She left before Victoria could respond, her heart pounding not with nerves, but with something akin to triumph. Maybe pretending to be confident would eventually turn into reality. The black Lincoln was waiting exactly at 12:45, and the driver, a middle-aged man named Robert, who greeted Cassandra with professional courtesy, navigated through Seattle's midday traffic with silent efficiency. The Metropolitan Grill was in the heart of the financial district, a classic steakhouse that exuded power and old money. Christian was already there when Cassandra arrived, sitting at a corner table that offered privacy, but was still visible enough for anyone who wanted to observe. He stood when he saw her, and Cassandra noticed how several gazes in the restaurant followed them, him in the charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, her in the teal dress she had bought in a panic the night before. "You look beautiful," Christian said softly as she approached, pulling the chair out for her with a gesture that seemed natural, but that Cassandra knew was performative. They were on stage now. "Thank you." She sat down, accepting the menu the waiter offered with a practiced smile. "You look tired." It was true. Up close, the shadows under Christian's eyes were more pronounced, and there was a tension in his shoulders that the expensive suit couldn't completely hide. "Board meetings this week," he explained after the waiter walked away to fetch water. "Veronica was there. She mentioned you." Cassandra felt her stomach tighten. "What did she say?" "She asked who the interesting young employee was that I met at the party. Tried to make it casual, but everyone in the room could feel the tension." Christian leaned slightly forward, his voice dropping. "I said we were getting to know each other, that you were smart, talented, and that I was impressed." Something in the way he said that last word made Cassandra's heart skip a beat. And she believed it? She wants to believe that I'm lying to myself about my feelings for her, but I doubt it. Christian paused when the waiter returned with water and wine, waiting until they were alone again. "That's why tomorrow's event is crucial. Veronica will be there. Half the board will be there. We need to be convincing." Cassandra took a sip of water, trying to process that. Convincing how? Like a couple who are in the early stages of a relationship, interested in each other, but still navigating newness. Christian watched her with those dark gray eyes that seemed to catalog every reaction. "Will you be uncomfortable if I touch your arm? Your hand?" The question was practical, professional even, but the way he asked it, with a hesitation that suggested the answer truly mattered to him, turned it into something more personal. "No," Cassandra answered honestly, "but we have to establish boundaries. What is acceptable in public? What crosses the line?" Christian nodded, and for the first time since sitting down, something like relief softened his features. "I completely agree. So let's set some rules." They spent lunch discussing the parameters of their charade between bites of perfectly cooked steak and salads that Cassandra barely tasted. Casual touches were acceptable: hands, arms, backs. Christian could drape his arm around her in public, but always giving Cassandra space to pull away if she wanted. Kisses would be limited to the hand, cheek, maybe forehead if the situation called for it. Lips only if absolutely necessary, and with explicit consent. "This sounds like a corporate contract," Cassandra commented with a small smile, trying to lighten the tension that permeated the conversation. "Because it essentially is," Christian replied, but there was a hint of humor in his eyes. Though with much greater personal consequences than any merger or acquisition. When they were finishing dessert, crème brûlée that Cassandra insisted on sharing, earning an amused look from Christian, he leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her feel exposed. "Can I ask a personal question?" Cassandra hesitated, then nodded. "The woman you were avoiding at the party, Victoria Chen from legal, ex-girlfriend, The direct observation made Cassandra choke slightly on the coffee she had just taken. How did you? I recognized the look of someone trying to escape a persistent ex. I've been living it for 2 years. Christian tilted his head. And the way she watched you and me together. Wounded possessiveness. Cassandra didn't want to discuss Victoria, but there was something in Christian's openness, in the vulnerability he had shown by sharing his situation, that made her feel she owed him reciprocity. We broke up 3 months ago. She left me for someone who had more future in the company. The words still hurt, but less than before. So when you asked me to pretend that almost kiss, part of me wanted her to see. I wanted her to know that I was fine. Better than fine. Christian was silent for a long moment, his eyes never leaving Cassandra's face. So we are both using this to prove something. To ourselves, or to other people. It sounds less noble when you put it that way. No. Christian reached across the table, pausing inches from Cassandra's fingers. A silent question. When she didn't pull away, he covered her hand with his, the touch warm and surprisingly gentle. It feels human, and sometimes we need little acts of revenge to move on. Cassandra looked at their intertwined hands, aware of the discreet glances from other patrons in the restaurant. They were putting on a show, playing roles. But the warmth of Christian's hand against hers, the way his thumb traced small, unconscious circles on her skin, that felt dangerously real. And when they left the restaurant together, Christian's arm lightly on her back, guiding her toward the waiting car, Cassandra wondered if carefully drawn lines could really contain something that was already beginning to feel bigger than both of them. The dress arrived on Friday afternoon, delivered by a messenger who seemed to treat the matte black box as if it contained crown jewels. Cassandra signed for it with trembling hands, closing the door of her apartment before daring to open the package. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a long wine-colored dress that captured the light in a mesmerizing way, the fabric flowing like water between her fingers. The attached card had only 3 words in Christian's angular handwriting: "For tomorrow. C." Cassandra should have returned it. She should have called and explained that accepting expensive gifts crossed a line that even her carefully established rules hadn't addressed. Instead, she tried on the dress, watching in the fogged mirror of her room how the impeccable cut transformed her silhouette into something elegant and sophisticated. It was the kind of outfit that belonged to a woman who attended galas in 5-star hotels, not to a junior assistant, special projects coordinator, who still bought coffee at Starbucks with a rewards card. Her phone buzzed with a message from Christian. "Lauren will send a hair and makeup team tomorrow at 5 p.m. The event starts at 7:30 p.m. I'll arrive to pick you up at 7. Makeup team." Cassandra sat heavily on the bed, still wearing the expensive dress, the reality of the situation finally penetrating the adrenaline fog that had carried her through the week. She had agreed to pretend to be the girlfriend of one of the most powerful men in Seattle. She would be introduced to the corporate elite, smiling and pretending to belong to a world that would normally treat her as invisible. And all of this while her ex-girlfriend watched from somewhere in the shadows, drawing conclusions that Cassandra both feared and secretly desired. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was Marcus. "I need details. All the details. Wine and confessions at my apartment now?" Cassandra hesitated, then typed, "Tomorrow. I promise." Lies multiplied like rabbits. She was becoming fluent in the language of omission, half-truths, the smile that hid complications. Victoria had once accused her of being too transparent, of wearing her heart on her sleeve as if it were a badge of honor. Looking at her reflection now, Cassandra barely recognized the woman who returned her gaze. Saturday dawned with a surprisingly clear sky, the winter sun turning Seattle into something almost magical. Cassandra spent the day in a state of controlled anxiety, compulsively cleaning the apartment, then stopping to wonder why it mattered if her space was organized. Christian wouldn't be coming here. No one from high society would cross the threshold of her modest Capitol Hill apartment with its noisy neighbors and the washing machine that only worked if you kicked it at the right angle. Lauren's team arrived promptly at 5. 3 professional women who transformed Cassandra's small bathroom into an improvised beauty salon. They worked with silent efficiency, apparently without judgment about the modest apartment or Cassandra's obvious nervousness. When they finished at 6:40, Cassandra could barely recognize herself in the mirror. Her brown hair had been transformed into soft waves cascading over her shoulders, the makeup enhancing her brown eyes without looking overdone, and the wine dress fit as if it had been tailored for her body. She looked like she belonged to the world she was about to enter. The illusion was perfect. Christian arrived exactly at 7, and when Cassandra opened the door, she saw him freeze for a fraction of a second. His eyes traveled her length, and something indefinable passed over his expression before the professional mask returned. "You look stunning," he said. And there was a quality in his voice that made Cassandra's heart race. He was impeccable in a tuxedo, the kind of effortless elegance that came from generations of privilege and education in exclusive schools. But Cassandra noticed the small signs of tension, the tight line of his jaw, the way his fingers tapped lightly against his thigh. "Nervous?" she asked, as they walked down the narrow hallway to the elevator. "You should be asking that of yourself," Christian replied, but there was a small smile touching his lips. "Although honestly, yes. Veronica will be looking for cracks in the facade. She's exceptional at finding weaknesses." The Four Seasons was resplendent with winter decorations, the lobby transformed into a wonderland of twinkling white lights and extravagant floral arrangements. Cassandra felt eyes following them as Christian guided her through the space, his hand firm on the small of her back, a silent declaration of ownership that was entirely performative, yet sent warmth down her spine. The ballroom on the second floor was buzzing with Seattle's elite, executives she recognized from business magazines, socialites whose charity parties filled the society pages, politicians smiling their practiced smiles while making promises they rarely kept. Cassandra suddenly understood the magnitude of what Christian was asking. This wasn't just about deceiving a persistent ex. It was stepping into a world where a misstep could destroy reputations. "Breathe," Christian murmured in her ear, low enough that only she could hear. "You belong here as much as anyone else." A lie, of course, but a kind one. They hadn't taken 3 steps into the ballroom when a woman appeared in front of them. Tall, blonde, with the kind of polished beauty that came from favorable genetics and expensive maintenance. She wore a black dress that probably cost more than Cassandra's car, if she had a car, and her ice blue eyes fixed on Cassandra with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. "Christian." The woman's voice was smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. "What a surprise to see you here." "Veronica." Christian didn't remove his hand from Cassandra's back, but she felt his fingers tighten slightly. "This is Cassandra Hayes, Special Projects Coordinator at Stone Enterprises." Veronica's eyes slid to Cassandra, and she had the distinct feeling of being catalogued, assessed, and deemed insufficient in a matter of seconds. "I can't believe we haven't been formally introduced," Veronica said, extending a hand with perfectly manicured nails. "Though I've heard your name recently, in interesting contexts." Cassandra shook the offered hand, refusing to show intimidation. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ms. Ashford. Christian mentioned your excellent work in the acquisitions department." Something sharp passed through Veronica's eyes. He mentioned how thoughtful of him. She turned her attention back to Christian, and Cassandra saw the way her mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing something that seemed dangerously close to desperation. "We need to talk, Christian. About the Brisbane project. There are complications. The board can wait until Monday," Christian interrupted, his voice polite but firm. "Tonight is for relaxing, not for business. Since when do you distinguish between the two?" Veronica laughed, but the sound had sharp edges. Her eyes returned to Cassandra, Or perhaps your priorities have changed recently. The tension was palpable. A triangle of unspoken words that threatened to explode into something ugly. Cassandra felt Christian's hand move from her back to her waist, pulling her slightly closer. A protective, possessive move. "My priorities are exactly where they should be," Christian said, and there was a quality in his voice that brooked no argument. The trio stood in uncomfortable silence for 3 heartbeats. Then Veronica smiled, that kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, I don't want to interrupt your evening. Enjoy the event." She walked away, but not before Cassandra caught the look she threw over her shoulder. A look that promised this was far from over. "That was," Cassandra began. "Just the beginning," Christian finished grimly. "She'll be watching us all night, looking for any sign that this isn't real." As if on cue, Cassandra noticed several pairs of eyes were fixed on them, conversations unfolding in low tones that suggested speculation. She and Christian had become the entertainment of the evening, a live corporate soap opera. "Then let's give her a good show," Cassandra said, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. She turned to Christian, raising a hand to adjust his tie unnecessarily, aware of how the gesture would appear intimate to onlookers. "We can do this." Christian looked at her, and something changed in his expression. His hands found her waist, holding her in a way that felt too real for Cassandra's comfort. "You are braver than I deserve," he said softly. Before Cassandra could respond, the music began, a live orchestra playing something classical and romantic. Pairs started to migrate to the dance floor, and Christian extended a hand. "May I have this dance?" Cassandra hesitated only momentarily before placing her hand in his. Christian led her to the dance floor, one hand on her waist, the other gently wrapping around her fingers with a firm yet tender grip. They began to move, and Cassandra realized he was a skilled dancer, guiding her through the steps with easy confidence. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" she asked, trying to keep the conversation casual, despite how aware she was of his body pressed against hers, his warmth seeping through the layers of expensive fabric. "Mandatory etiquette school. My mother insisted." Christian spun her gently, pulling her back closer. "Where did you learn?" "YouTube, and a disastrous salsa class that Victoria dragged me to once." Christian smiled, a genuine expression that completely transformed his face. "Well, you are much better than that description suggests." They danced in silence for several minutes, the music enveloping them as the ballroom spun in her peripheral vision. Cassandra could see Veronica at the edges of the dance floor, watching with an intensity that made Cassandra's skin tingle. Others were watching too, some with curiosity, others with that speculative quality suggesting stories were being built, rumors forming. "We're giving them a good show," Cassandra murmured. "I'm not thinking about them right now," Christian replied, and there was something in his voice that made Cassandra look up, finding his dark gray eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that had nothing to do with acting. The music slowed, softening into something more intimate, and Christian pulled her closer, eliminating the respectable space he had maintained between them. Cassandra could feel his heartbeat against her chest, fast and strong. Or maybe it was hers. It was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. "Cassandra," Christian said, his voice husky. A hand touched his shoulder, interrupting whatever he was about to say. They pulled apart to find an older man, graying hair and a stern expression, watching them with barely concealed disapproval. "Christian, we need to talk about your presence at the next board meeting. There are issues that Veronica raised." And so the night continued, an endless series of interruptions, conversations filled with political subtext, smiles that hid knives. Cassandra played her part perfectly, the attentive girlfriend who smiled at the right moments, touched Christian's arm when appropriate, showed polite interest in corporate conversations that left her numb. It was exhausting. It was terrifying. And somewhere in the middle of it all, When Christian looked at her with genuine gratitude, after she skillfully redirected a particularly tense conversation, Cassandra realized something that scared her more than Veronica Ashford or any board member. She was starting to like him. The real Christian, not the CEO facade, and that was a complication her careful rules had never anticipated. Sunday morning light flooded Cassandra's apartment through the thin curtains she had never bothered to replace, pulling her from a restless sleep filled with fragments of memories from the night before. The wine-colored dress hung carefully on the closet door, a tangible reminder that this had not been an elaborate dream. Her phone showed 3 missed messages from Marcus, 2 from Christian, and surprisingly, 1 from a number she did not immediately recognize until she opened it and saw the name at the end. Victoria. "We need to talk. There are things about Christian Wolfe that you should know." Cassandra stared at the message for a long moment, her stomach tightening. Victoria's audacity in contacting her after months of silence, using false concern as an excuse to interfere in her life again, should have infuriated her. Instead, she felt only a deep weariness. She deleted the message without responding. Christian's messages were simpler, more practical. The first, sent at 11 the night before, "Thank you for tonight. You were perfect." The second, half an hour ago, "Brunch still on? Portage Bay Cafe at 11. Lauren confirmed that Veronica reserved a table for the same time. Cassandra checked the clock. 9:40. Enough time to try to become human again after 4 hours of fitful sleep. She dragged herself to the shower, letting the nearly scalding water wash away the tension built up in her muscles. As the steam filled the small bathroom, her mind involuntarily drifted back to that moment on the dance floor when Christian had held her closer and said her name with an intensity that had nothing to do with acting. She was treading on dangerous ground. Her carefully established rules about physical boundaries did not address the much more perilous complication of emotional boundaries. How do you protect your heart when you were pretending to give it away? Portage Bay Cafe was a Seattle favorite for weekend brunch, known for its organic ingredients and a perpetual line of customers waiting for tables. Christian was already there when Cassandra arrived, sitting at a table by the window that offered a view of the Portage Bay. He wore dark jeans and a gray sweater that made him appear more approachable, less the relentless CEO, and more just an attractive man enjoying a Sunday morning. "Did you sleep?" he asked as she approached, standing up automatically, an old-fashioned gesture of politeness that had probably been instilled in him since childhood. "A few hours." Cassandra accepted the chair he pulled out for her. "You?" "Enough." A lie, if the shadows still present under his eyes were any indication. Christian sat down again, pushing a cup of coffee toward her. "Black, 2 sugars. Lauren mentioned that's how you take it." The fact that he remembered, or at least cared enough to ask his assistant, warmed something in Cassandra's chest in a way that was entirely inconvenient. "Thank you," they ordered, falling into a surprisingly easy conversation about nothing important. Christian shared stories about growing up in Seattle, the son of executives who expected excellence and accepted nothing less. Cassandra shared stories about her more modest childhood in Spokane, loving parents who supported her when she came out at 17, even if they didn't fully understand. "My mom still asks if I'm sure," Cassandra said with a small smile, poking at the Eggs Benedict that had arrived. As if sexual orientation were a prolonged experimental phase. "My parents never asked," Christian replied, his voice carefully neutral. "When I casually mentioned a college boyfriend, my mom changed the subject so quickly you'd think I'd announced I was joining a circus. After that, we just didn't discuss my personal life." There was pain there, old and well hidden, but present nonetheless. Cassandra reached across the table, lightly touching his fingers. "I'm sorry." Christian looked at her hand, then at her face, something indefinable passing through his expression. "It's part of why Veronica has so much control. When someone from our social class, our circles, seemed to accept that part of me without judgment, I clung to the relationship longer than I should have. I ignored obvious red flags because I felt validated." We all do that in some way, Cassandra said softly. Victoria made me feel sophisticated, ambitious by association. Like dating someone successful made me successful too. When she ended it, it wasn't just a broken heart. It was realizing I had outsourced my self-esteem. They sat in silence for a moment, hands still lightly touching across the table, a connection that had started as performance but had transformed into something more genuine. It was Christian who finally spoke. Veronica is here. Cassandra didn't turn immediately. Instead, she took a deliberate sip of coffee. Where? 3 tables behind you. To the left, with 2 women I recognized from the board. Christian didn't look directly at them, but Cassandra could see the tension returning to his shoulders. They saw us. Then let's give them something to see. Cassandra turned her hand, intertwining her fingers with Christian's in a way that would be clearly visible. Tell me more about you. Not the CEO, but the Christian that no one knows. It was a distraction tactic, but also genuine curiosity. Christian hesitated, then began to speak about small things that humanized the man behind the expensive suit. He liked old jazz, the kind that no one else their age appreciated. He cooked when corporate stress became too much, finding something meditative in following precise recipes. There was a dog, a golden retriever named Gatsby, who lived with him in his penthouse in Belltown. You have a dog named Gatsby? Cassandra couldn't hide her smile. My nephew named him. The kid is 8 and was in a literary obsession phase. Christian smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face completely. Though I admit there's irony in an overly friendly dog being named after a character defined by self-imposed isolation. They finished brunch in a curious bubble of intimacy, talking like 2 people on a real first date instead of participants in an elaborate charade. Cassandra almost forgot they were being watched until Christian paid the bill and guided her out with a hand on her back. The touch, now familiar, sending warmth down her spine. On the sidewalk, under Seattle's partly cloudy sky, Christian turned to her. Thank you, again. I know I keep saying this, but you're making something difficult significantly more bearable. It's a business arrangement, Cassandra said, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. You're compensating me adequately. Yes, of course. Something passed through Christian's eyes, something that looked suspiciously like disappointment. He took a step back, creating physical distance that reflected the professional she had just verbally re-established. So, about next week. Lauren will send your schedule. There's a business dinner on Tuesday where it would be beneficial for you to attend and possibly Christian. A feminine voice cut through him, and both turned to find Veronica Ashford standing a few feet away, her 2 board companions flanking her like elegant bodyguards. What a coincidence to find you here. There was nothing coincidental about it, of course. This whole charade had been orchestrated for this moment. Veronica, Christian greeted, his voice returning to that controlled professional tone. Sharon, Patricia, I hope you enjoyed brunch. Charming as always, one of the women said, her eyes examining Cassandra with evaluative interest that made Cassandra feel like a specimen under a microscope. And this must be the young lady who has been occupying so much of your time lately, Christian. Cassandra Hayes, as she introduced herself, extending her hand and finding a firm but brief handshake. It's a pleasure to meet you. Sharon Berkowitz, board member of Stone Enterprises, and this is Patricia Lynn, also from the board. Sharon smiled, but there was a predatory quality to it. Veronica mentioned you work in the marketing department. Special projects now. Veronica corrected before Cassandra could respond, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. A very rapid promotion, I must say. Just a few weeks with the company before getting your own office. The implication hung in the air like toxic smoke. Cassandra felt her face heat up, but before she could formulate a response, Christian stepped closer to her, his arm sliding around her waist in a way that was simultaneously protective and possessive. Cassandra was promoted based on merit and impressive skills that our department was wasting in administrative roles, he said, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. Any contrary implication is not only inaccurate but highly inappropriate. Sharon and Patricia exchanged significant glances. Veronica, however, kept her eyes fixed on Christian, something fierce and desperate burning in her blue depths. You really believe this will last, Christian? That she understands your world, your responsibilities? We had something real, something built on mutual understanding of our lives, our pressures. We had something toxic, Christian corrected, his voice low but firm. And it ended 2 years ago. It's time to accept that and move on, Veronica. For a moment, something broke in Veronica's carefully composed expression, a glimpse of raw pain that made Cassandra remember that beneath the political plays and manipulation, there was a truly hurt person. But then the mask returned, and Veronica smiled, that sharp smile that didn't reach her eyes. Of course, you are absolutely right. She looked at Cassandra, and there was something in her eyes that seemed almost pitying. Good luck, Ms. Hayes. You're going to need it. The 3 women walked away, leaving Christian and Cassandra standing on the sidewalk in tense silence. Finally, Christian let out a long breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his soul. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have let that escalate like that. You didn't let it, Cassandra said gently. You stood up for yourself. For us. She paused, then added, though she did raise a point, about me not understanding your world. Christian turned to face her completely, his hands finding her shoulders. You understand the parts that matter. The rest is just corporate theater and politics that I'd prefer to forget most of the time. His thumbs traced small circles on her arms, an absent gesture that sent shivers down her skin. You remind me that there's more to life than board meetings and quarterly reports. Cassandra got lost in his dark gray eyes, seeing vulnerability there that he rarely allowed others to witness. They were dangerously close to crossing lines that had been established to protect both, and Cassandra found herself increasingly less interested in protection and more interested in discovering what would happen if they simply let their defenses drop. Christian, she began, not quite sure what she was about to say. His phone vibrated, breaking the moment. He checked the screen, and Cassandra saw frustration pass over his face. Work emergency. I need to go to the office. The bubble burst, reality flooding back in. Cassandra nodded, taking a step back. Of course, I understand. Christian hesitated, seeming to want to say something more, but then he simply nodded and turned toward the Lincoln waiting on the street. Cassandra watched him walk away, aware that something had changed between them that weekend. The question was whether that change would bring them closer or make the whole charade unsustainable. Monday arrived with a thick fog enveloping Seattle, transforming the city into a ghostly landscape where buildings materialized and disappeared like mirages. Cassandra arrived at the office earlier than usual, hoping that the familiar routine of work could restore some sense of normalcy after the intense weekend. But normalcy felt like a distant concept when Lauren Mitchell appeared in her office at 8:15 with a thick, cream-colored envelope. Mr. Wolf asked me to deliver this personally, Lauren said, her expression professional but with a hint of curiosity in her experienced eyes. He's in meetings all day, but he would like to have dinner tonight. His driver will pick you up at 7. Cassandra accepted the envelope, feeling its weight in her hands. Thank you, Lauren. When the executive assistant left, Cassandra opened the envelope and found legal documents printed on the letterhead of a law firm she recognized as one of the most prestigious in Seattle. As she read, her stomach tightened progressively. It was a formal contract, detailing the terms of her agreement with Christian, but with additions they hadn't discussed. A substantial bonus would be deposited into her account at the end of the month. Her position as Special Projects Coordinator would be permanent, with significant salary increases, and there was a comprehensive confidentiality clause prohibiting her from discussing any aspect of her relationship with Christian, real or feigned, with anyone for a period of 5 years after the agreement ended. The last page had a line for her signature, with a handwritten note from Christian. I want to ensure you are protected, no matter what happens. Please review with your own attorney if you wish. Cassandra let the papers drop onto the table, a feeling of nausea spreading through her stomach. It was all too corporate, too transactional. She knew her arrangement with Christian was essentially a business deal, but seeing everything formalized in legal language made it impossible to pretend that something deeper was happening between them. Those moments at brunch, the intimacy in his eyes when he held her, the vulnerability he had shared about his family. All of that was just part of the transaction, protected by confidentiality clauses and financial compensation. She spent the day in a fog of meetings and reports that barely registered, her mind repeatedly returning to that contract. Marcus tried to strike up a conversation at lunch, clearly curious about the weekend's events, but Cassandra deflected with excuses about being busy. The lie was becoming so natural that it frightened her. At exactly 7, Robert was waiting at the main entrance, holding the door of the Lincoln with his usual professional courtesy. The drive to the destination took 40 minutes, leaving the heart of Seattle towards the hills of Mercer Island, where mansions hid behind tall gates and ancient trees. When they finally stopped, Cassandra found herself looking at a modern glass and steel house that seemed to float over Lake Washington, its lights reflecting on the dark water. Christian met her at the door, and Cassandra immediately noticed that something was different. He wore jeans and a casual shirt barefoot, his hair slightly tousled as if he had run his fingers through it repeatedly. There was a vulnerability in his casual appearance that made him more approachable and, paradoxically, more intimidating. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. "Sorry for the formality of the contract. My lawyers insisted." Cassandra entered an open space that was as different from the corporate office as possible. Glass walls offered panoramic views of the lake, modern yet comfortable furniture created cozy areas, and contemporary art added splashes of color. But what caught her attention the most was the golden retriever that ran towards her, tail wagging furiously. "Gatsby, sit!" Christian ordered. But there was affection in his voice. The dog obeyed for exactly 2 seconds before deciding that Cassandra needed enthusiastic greetings involving licking her hands and pressing his snout against her legs. "He has no sense of personal space," Christian apologized, but he was smiling in a way that completely transformed his face. "Gatsby, behave." Cassandra knelt down, rubbing the dog's soft ears. "I don't mind. I've always wanted a dog, but my apartment doesn't allow pets." Watching her interact with Gatsby, something changed in Christian's expression. "Come, I prepared dinner." "Well, I tried to prepare dinner. There's a good chance it will be inedible." He led her to a gourmet kitchen where pots were boiling on the stove and something that smelled surprisingly good was baking in the oven. Christian poured wine, and Cassandra sat on a high stool, watching him work with an intense concentration that suggested cooking was indeed his form of meditation. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "We could have gone to a restaurant. And be watched by more people? Have our conversations interrupted every 5 minutes?" Christian shook his head, testing something in a pot before adding salt. "I thought you might appreciate a night without performance." The consideration behind that gesture made Cassandra's chest tighten. "About the contract. You don't have to sign it," Christian interrupted, turning to face her. "If it makes you uncomfortable, we can tear it up and continue as we were." "But your lawyers—" "Work for me, not the other way around." He stepped closer, resting his hands on the counter on either side of her, not touching, but close enough for Cassandra to feel the warmth of his body. "Cassandra, I don't want this to be just a transaction. I thought the contract would protect you, ensure you wouldn't leave this situation in a worse position. But I realize now that it may seem like I'm trying to buy your silence, your complicity. Isn't that what it is?" The words came out sharper than Cassandra intended, but the confusion and frustration of the past few days finally overflowed. "You pay me to pretend feelings, to play a role. It's literally a transaction." Christian recoiled as if he had been struck. He ran a hand through his hair, that gesture of nervousness she was starting to recognize. It started that way, but I no longer know what is real and what is fake. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken things. Cassandra could hear Gatsby drinking water noisily somewhere, the sound of distant cars on the road, her own heart pounding too loudly in her ears. "Christian, I know," he interrupted, turning back to the stove and stirring something more forcefully than necessary. "I know this complicates everything. That's why I didn't mention it before. But after yesterday, after how I felt when Veronica insinuated things about you, when I saw you interacting with Gatsby as if you belonged here." He paused, his back still turned to her. "I can't pretend anymore that I'm just pretending." Cassandra stepped down from the stool, approaching him slowly. "So what are we doing?" "I don't know." Christian turned, and the vulnerability in his eyes was so raw it hurt to look at. "I know we started this for the wrong reasons. I know there's a problematic power imbalance because I'm technically your boss. I know it's a terrible idea to mix business with anything personal." He took a step closer. "But I also know that I wake up thinking about you. That I look for excuses to text you. That almost kiss under the mistletoe was the most real moment I've had in years." Cassandra's heart was racing now, her mind struggling to process that confession. "A week ago, you were just the scary CEO who never smiled. Now you're telling me you have real feelings?" "Extremely inconvenient and ill-advised feelings, but yes." Christian reached out hesitantly, giving her time to pull back. When she didn't, his fingers found her cheek, tracing the line of her jaw with a gentleness that contradicted his normally controlled exterior. "And I suspect, from the way you look at me when you think I'm not noticing, that maybe you're not the only one." Cassandra should have denied it. She should have set boundaries, reminded them both of the complications, of the differences between their worlds. Instead, she found herself covering his hand with hers, pressing against the pressure. "This is crazy," she murmured. "Complete madness," Christian agreed, moving even closer. "But maybe the best madness I've ever been involved in." They stayed like that for a suspended moment, on the brink of something that would change everything. Then an alarm went off, making them both jump. The oven. Christian cursed softly, rushing to rescue whatever was baking. Cassandra laughed, the tension breaking into something lighter. He pulled out a perfectly golden, not burnt chicken tray and placed it on the counter with a look of relief. "Crisis averted," he announced, "though the dramatic moment is ruined." "Maybe that's a good thing," Cassandra said, returning to the stool as Christian prepared the plates. "Gives us time to think about what we're doing before we do something we can't undo." Christian served dinner, joining her at the small dining table that offered a view of the dark lake beyond the windows. They ate and talked about safer things, letting that almost confession hang between them like an unfulfilled promise. But when Robert eventually arrived to take Cassandra back to her apartment, Christian walked her to the door and took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "Think about this," he said softly. "About whether you want to keep pretending, or if you're willing to risk something more real." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss against her fingers. "But know that whatever your decision, I will respect it. And the work, the position you've earned, will not change." Cassandra waved from the back seat of the Lincoln, watching Christian stand at the entrance of his beautiful home, Gatsby by his side, both growing smaller as they drove away. Her mind spun with possibilities and complications, but one thing was clear. The careful lines they had drawn were blurring irreparably, and she wasn't sure if she wanted to restore them. Morning light filtered through the curtains of Cassandra's apartment, but she had been awake for hours, watching the shadows dance on the ceiling as she tried to sort through the thoughts that had kept her mind racing through the night. Christian's confession echoed in her head, mingling with her own confused emotions, until it was impossible to distinguish fear from hope, caution from desire. Her phone vibrated on the bedside table. A message from Marcus. "Emergency coffee? You seem like you need it." Cassandra smiled despite herself. Marcus always had a sixth sense for when she was struggling with something important. She quickly replied, agreeing to meet him in an hour at their favorite cafe near Pike Place Market. The cold December air nipped at her cheeks as Cassandra walked through the familiar streets of Seattle, the smell of roasted coffee and fresh fish from the market mingling in the air. Marcus was already waiting at a corner table when she arrived, 2 large coffees and a chocolate croissant that he knew was her weakness. "You look terrible," he said bluntly, pushing the coffee toward her. "And before you deny it, your eyes have those bags that only show up when you've spent the whole night processing something important." Cassandra took a long sip of the coffee, buying time. The confidentiality clause loomed in her mind, but this was Marcus, her best friend at the office, perhaps her best friend in general. And she needed advice from someone not involved in the situation. "If I tell you something, promise it stays between us?" Marcus leaned forward, his expression shifting from concerned to intensely curious. "Always. You know that." So Cassandra told him everything, from the initial meeting under the mistletoe to the dinner at Christian's house the night before. She omitted some details, but shared enough for Marcus to understand the magnitude of the situation. When she finished, her friend was looking at her with a mix of astonishment and concern. "So, let me see if I understand correctly," Marcus said slowly. "You agreed to pretend to be the CEO's girlfriend to help him escape an obsessive ex, but now you both have developed real feelings. And you're terrified because this could blow up spectacularly in about 12 different ways. When you put it that way, it sounds even worse than I thought. Because it is worse." Marcus took her hand across the table. "Cass, I've known you for 3 years. I've seen you go through the breakup with Victoria. I've seen you rebuild yourself. And honestly, I haven't seen you smile the way you smiled when you talked about this guy since, well, maybe never." Cassandra felt her chest tighten. "But what if it's just the novelty, the thrill of something forbidden? What if we're confusing chemistry with real compatibility?" "Those are valid questions," Marcus agreed. "But here's another. What if it is real? What if you let it pass out of fear and spend the rest of your life wondering?" Before Cassandra could respond, her phone rang. Lauren Mitchell. She answered, her heart inexplicably racing. "Ms. Hayes, I'm sorry to disturb you on your day off." Lauren's voice had a tense quality that Cassandra had never heard before. "But there has been a development. Veronica Ashford has called an emergency board meeting for this afternoon. She is making allegations about inappropriate relationships between you and Mr. Wolf, suggesting conflicts of interest and favoritism." Cassandra's blood ran cold. "What?" "Mr. Wolf asked me to inform you. He wants you to know that this will not affect your position in the company, regardless of the outcome. But he thought you should be aware of the situation." After the call ended, Cassandra stood staring at her phone, feeling the world narrow around her. Marcus was watching her with concern, clearly having picked up on the essence of the conversation from her side. "What happened?" "It's blowing up," Cassandra said weakly. "Exactly as I feared." She stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over her coffee. She needed to see Christian, talk to him, before that board meeting turned everything into something even more complicated. Marcus didn't try to stop her, just squeezed her shoulder in silent support as she rushed out of the cafe. The taxi ride to Stone Enterprises felt endless. Cassandra mentally rehearsed what she would say, but each version sounded inadequate. When she finally arrived on the 40th floor, Lauren was waiting for her with a grim expression. "He's in his office, alone, for now." Lauren paused, then added quietly, "For what it's worth, I think you two are good together." And Veronica Ashford needed someone to finally stand up to her for a long time. Christian's office was quiet, the door slightly ajar. Cassandra knocked lightly before entering, finding him standing by the windows, hands in his pockets, looking out at the city below. He turned when he heard her enter, and she saw the weariness on his face, the lines of tension around his eyes. "You didn't have to come," he said. but there was relief in his voice. Lauren called me. Cassandra closed the door behind her, approaching him. Christian, this is my fault. I should have been more careful. Less obvious. No. He covered the distance between them in 2 steps, taking her hands. This is not your fault. It's a desperate attempt by Veronica to control me when she realized she was losing. And honestly, I'm tired of letting her dictate my life. But the board can question my professional judgment as much as they want. My results speak for themselves. Christian pulled her closer, and Cassandra could see the determination burning in his gray eyes. But I will not let them question you, your character, or your qualifications. You earned your position. And if the board can't see that, then maybe it's time to reevaluate my position here. Cassandra gasped. You can't be serious. You built this company. And I can build another one. Or do something completely different. Christian let go of one of her hands to touch her face, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw with that gentleness that always surprised her. I've spent years putting this company above everything, above relationships, personal happiness, any chance of a real life outside these walls. And for what? To have Veronica Ashford manipulating board members because she can't accept rejection. But if you leave because of me, it would be because I'm choosing something real, over something that has long ceased to satisfy me. He leaned his forehead against hers, their breaths mingling. Cassandra, last night I said I didn't know what was real and what was fake. But I spent the whole night thinking, and now I know. Everything with you is real. Alarmingly, inconveniently real. Cassandra's heart was racing, every part of her aware of how close he was, how easy it would be to close the small distance between them. Christian, The door swung open abruptly, and Lauren appeared with an urgent expression. Sorry to interrupt, but the board is meeting in 15 minutes. Mr. Wolf, you need to prepare. Christian nodded, but he didn't pull away from Cassandra immediately. Instead, he took her hand, intertwining their fingers. Come with me. To the meeting. What? No, I can't. You can. And I want you there. His jaw set with determination. If Veronica is going to make allegations about us, then let's confront them together. No more pretending, no more games. Just the truth. Cassandra looked into his eyes and saw not the calculating CEO everyone knew, but the man she had come to know over the past weeks, the one who cooked when stressed and had a dog named Gatsby, and who looked at her as if she were something precious and unexpected. Okay, she heard herself say. Together. The boardroom was intimidating, all dark wood and leather chairs that exuded authority. 7 board members were already seated when Christian and Cassandra entered, Veronica among them, her expression carefully neutral. Sharon Berkowitz, the board chair Cassandra had met at brunch, occupied the head of the table. Christian, Sharon began, her voice professional but not devoid of sympathy. We appreciate you attending this last-minute meeting. And Ms. Hayes, while this is not standard protocol, we understand your presence may be relevant. Christian did not release Cassandra's hand as he addressed the board. Before we begin, I would like to clarify a few facts. Cassandra Hayes was promoted based entirely on merit. Her performance evaluation, which any of you can review, demonstrates exceptional skills that were being wasted in her previous position. No one is questioning her professional abilities, Veronica interrupted, her voice smooth but cutting. What I'm questioning is the suspicious timing of her promotion and the nature of her relationship with you, Christian. Employees have seen you in compromising situations. There are ethical implications. There are ethical implications in using your position on the board to harass an ex who has made it clear repeatedly that the relationship is over. Christian cut in, his voice low but filled with authority. I can provide documentation of 2 years of unwanted communications, unsolicited gifts, and interference in my personal life. A tense silence filled the room. Several board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Veronica paled but maintained her composure. This isn't about us, she said. but her voice trembled slightly. It's about ensuring that Stone Enterprises maintains ethical standards. Then let's talk about ethical standards. Cassandra was surprised to hear her own voice, firm despite the nerves making her hands tremble. I understand the appearance of this situation, but the truth is that Christian and I started getting to know each other outside of work completely by chance. My promotion was based on merit, and I can provide work portfolios that demonstrate my qualifications. Sharon leaned forward, studying both of them with those perceptive eyes. And the nature of your current relationship? Cassandra felt Christian tighten his grip on her hand. A silent question. She looked at him, saw vulnerability and hope in his eyes, and made a decision that would change everything. We're getting to know each other, she said clearly, romantically. And yes, it started in an unconventional way, but it's real, and I won't apologize for that. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, to Cassandra's surprise, Patricia Lynn, the other woman on the board she had met at brunch, smiled slightly. Well, at least it's honest. Patricia looked around the table. Personally, I don't see a conflict of interest here that justifies action. Ms. Hayes works in a different department, her promotion has proper documentation, and relationships between colleagues, while complicated, are not inherently unethical. Other board members nodded, some reluctantly, others with more conviction. Sharon watched Veronica for a long moment, and something passed between them, a silent understanding. Veronica, I appreciate your vigilance regarding the company's standards, Sharon said carefully, but I believe this issue can be resolved without formal action. However, I would like to suggest that you consider whether your position on the board continues to serve the best interests of all parties involved. It was a diplomatic dismissal wrapped in polite suggestion. Veronica understood, her posture stiffening. For a moment, Cassandra thought she would explode, make a scene. But then she simply nodded, gathering her things with trembling hands. Of course, Veronica said, her voice devoid of emotion. You are absolutely right. As she stood to leave, she paused beside Christian and Cassandra, looking at them with an expression impossible to decipher. I hope it was worth it, she said softly, and Cassandra couldn't tell if it was a threat or a reluctant blessing. After Veronica left and the board dispersed with assurances that the matter was closed, Christian finally exhaled the breath he seemed to have been holding. He turned to Cassandra, pulling her into a hug that lifted her off the ground for a moment. You were amazing, he murmured into her hair. Absolutely amazing. Cassandra pulled back enough to look at his face, seeing relief and something deeper in his eyes. So what do we do now? Christian smiled, that rare and genuine smile that completely transformed his face. Now we stop pretending. We stop worrying about appearances and politics, and what anyone else thinks. He held her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing her cheeks. And we find out if this between us can be as good as I suspect it will be. There are still complications, Cassandra pointed out, but she was smiling too. We work at the same company. We have different worlds. Then we'll work through the complications together. Christian leaned in closer, his forehead touching hers. Unless you want to back away, this is your chance, Cassandra. No judgments, no professional consequences. If this is a mistake,